One of the greatest desires of all of us here today is to gain life in Jehovah's new system of things. And this afternoon we're going to focus attention on one of the fundamental requirements for attaining that desire. Would you open your Bibles with me to Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Let's read it together. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in Jehovah with all your heart, and do not lean upon your own understanding. In all your ways take notice of him, and he himself will make your paths straight. Are we doing what that says? Do we trust Jehovah with all our heart? In all our ways do we take notice of him? Well, what is trust? Trust means to have confidence. If you're going to have confidence in a person, you need to know him well enough so that you're convinced of his truthfulness, his justice, and that he's lovingly concerned about your own welfare. Trusting in Jehovah, of course, involves more than trusting a human friend. Jehovah is God. We don't merely ask him for his opinion on things, listen to what he says, and then do something else. Now, we might do that with a human friend, mightn't we? Someone that we trust. We value his opinion. We don't always do what he says because there are other factors that influence our thinking. But that shouldn't be true with our relationship with God. In everything we do, we seek his direction. Now, we're well aware that he allows great latitude. He doesn't force us, but we don't want to miss the point of this. Jehovah deals with us much as parents do with a young child that's growing up. There are standards that apply to that household, but they don't expect a youngster to be an adult, do they? They allow the child to grow, to learn to do things, to apply them. He makes mistakes along the way. They give correction, but they're working toward that day when he'll conduct himself as a grown-up, as a member that well represents the household. And Jehovah, in a similar way, is very patient with us. He tells us things. He wants to see us apply them. We stumble and fumble a little bit along the way like a child learning to walk. We may not do exactly what he said, but he considers why. What is it that accounts for it? Is it lack of desire, or is it simply part of the growing process? If it's part of the growing process, he allows for that. He also knows that he's made us as individuals with personalities that are not exact duplicates of everyone else. Our personal abilities vary. Our resources of help vary. And so Jehovah takes all this into account, and when he gives his commands to us, he looks for us to apply them, but he also takes into account our circumstances in life, just as we must. So he's not expecting every individual to be an exact duplicate of every other individual in the congregation. Yet this doesn't mean that he's saying, in effect, well, it doesn't really make any difference what you do, because that isn't the case at all. If we trust in Jehovah with all our hearts, then our hearts are going to respond to his love. We're not going to be indifferent, but we'll constantly seek ways to bring our lives more fully in line with his purpose. Abraham was an individual who had such trust. And Genesis chapter 12 tells us something very interesting about that man of faith. Genesis chapter 12. Jehovah here speaks to Abraham and says in verse 1, "Go your way out of your country and from your relatives and from the house of your father to the country that I shall show you. And I shall make a great nation out of you, and I shall bless you, and I will make your name great, and prove yourself a blessing." That's a very interesting direction he gave him. He, in effect, was telling Abraham, I want you to leave your home here in Ur. Leave the relatives behind, Sarah's relatives too, and I want you to move into a foreign land. Now, I know you've never been there, but Abraham, go. Do it. Do it. You're going to enjoy a blessing, and you can be a blessing to other people. Just have faith to do it. And goody, verse 4 says, at that Abraham went, just as Jehovah had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now, this was no youngster's adventure on Abraham's part. He wasn't just thinking, oh, this sounds great, I'll get to see some of the world. You know, I've always been kind of cooped up here in Ur, and it'd be nice to see how other people live. Look at the latter part of that verse. Abraham was 75 years old when he went out from Haran and moved south down toward Canaan. Well, about 50 years later, according to chapter 22 in Genesis, Jesus, or rather Jehovah, spoke again to Abraham, and he says, Abraham, take please your son, your only son, whom you so love, Isaac, and make a trip to the land of Moriah, and there offer him up as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall designate to you. Well, now what did Abraham do with this? Now it wasn't just a matter of Abraham moving to another land, but his only son, the apple of his eye, that one that he had waited for till he was 100 years old. Jehovah says, take please that one, Abraham, and offer him up as a sacrifice on the mountain that I'll show you. Well, now what was Abraham going to do? Verse 3 says, so Abraham got up early in the morning and saddled his ass, took 2 of his attendants with him, and Isaac his son, and the split wood for the burnt offering, and he went to the place that Jehovah designated. But now, when you read something like that about Abraham, and we've read it again and again, our reaction is, well, that's fine. Abraham did what he should. A person should trust in God. But now let's put ourselves in that position. Would we have done what Abraham did? Jehovah said, leave your home. Now think of your home. Leave your home, your job in the community, leave behind the relatives, and I want you to go to another place where you can serve the interests of pure worship. And if you do, there's a blessing for you, and you can be a blessing to others. Now, could it be said of us, and we packed up and went and did as Jehovah directed? What if later Jehovah said, I want you to take your child, that one that's the apple of your eye, and I want you to encourage that child to undertake full-time service and be willing to go wherever he or she is sent by Jehovah's organization. Now, I know that one means a lot to you. You love to be together, but there will be a wonderful blessing for both of you and many others if you'll do it. Now, what's our reaction when we see ourselves in the picture? how does Jehovah speak to us today? He doesn't do it like he did with Abraham. There are no angels or no visions that we're having. But Jehovah speaks to us today just as really as he did back in the days of Abraham. If you were on a Bible study and that student asked you, how does Jehovah speak to us today? What would you answer? Well, you'd say, well, through his word, the Bible, right? Is that all? He speaks to us through his organization, too, doesn't he? And we recognize that. We receive direction through the Watchtower, through our congregation meetings, at our conventions, through the elders in the congregation. And we've explained that to those with whom we study many times. And it's right, that's correct. That's what the Bible shows as to God's dealings with us. Well, now, if that's how Jehovah is speaking to us, when he says today, those of you who are in position to do so, move out into another territory, in your circuit or elsewhere where the need is great. Can you go to serve where the need is greater in a foreign country? Will you encourage your children to get into full-time service? Now, how do we react to those invitations, to those encouragements? Do we react as Abraham did? We get up the next morning and we do exactly as Jehovah has said. What blessings come to those who do? Well, now maybe some of us are thinking, well, that is asking quite a bit. You know, you're talking about leaving a home behind, and you know what it takes to get a home today? You're talking about leaving your job and going to a community where you don't have a job, and undertaking service in that area. Really, is that realistic now? Well, how realistic was it back in Abraham's day? It's about the same as it is today. The question is, do we have faith in Jehovah? Do we trust him with all our heart? And do we respond to his direction? He extends to us the invitation, but it's very interesting. He does it in a way that allows for our growth. All of us have come to the point where we do have trust in Jehovah. We've made changes in our lives. Why? Well, we read what he says and we believe him, don't we? But Jehovah keeps extending other opportunities, other blessings, not necessarily to us by name, but through the congregation, to all of us, you see. Are you in position? Act. And what is he saying? What's in your heart, isn't it? He's saying, does your heart move you to do this? And he doesn't push us as an individual, but very kindly, he keeps dealing with us over a period of years until our love comes to the point where when Jehovah says something, our reaction is, I want to. And we start seeking ways to do it because we say, in view of everything that Jehovah has done for me, how can I hold back? And I know Jehovah will care for me if I just show the faith and act. And so we look at our situation, and we look at it very realistically and say, well, now, there are some things I'd like to do, but Jehovah tells me I've got some other responsibilities too, and I can't walk away from those. So we care for those, and when the opportunity opens up, we move out into this other field too. Why? Not because anybody pushes us, but because we've just come to feel that way about Jehovah, and we trust in him with all our heart. And how delightful it is that Jehovah allows us to go through this growing process, as it were, to learn to demonstrate our trust in little things. And some grow very quickly in this regard, others a little more slowly. Others have different circumstances in life that they cannot respond to the same things that their brother or sister in the congregation does, but Jehovah keeps providing the loving encouragement all the way. And with a God like that, don't you agree that it's a pleasure to give our lives in his service? A person comes to have such complete trust in Jehovah, according to Psalm 9, verse 10, when he comes to know God's name. Because that psalm says, those knowing your name will trust in you. Well, that's what we were talking about this morning, wasn't it? And of course, that getting to know the name means getting to know the person represented by the name. And as we come to know him, our trust becomes strong. Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2, says this in regard to this matter. Anyone dwelling in the secret place of the Most High will procure himself lodging under the very shadow of the Almighty One. Now, dwelling in the secret place of the Most High, what does that mean? Well, the Most High indicates Jehovah as the sovereign, universal sovereign. And one dwelling in the secret place of the Most High has acknowledged Jehovah as universal sovereign. Now, that's something the world can't see, they can't understand, but when a person acknowledges that, it's just as if he enjoys a hiding place under the protection of God himself. That's what it's saying. Well, why? Because we've learned to do what God says. And when we do what God says, we're always on the right track. And he's going to look after us in a way that the world just can't understand. So those who do this procure lodging under the very shadow of the Almighty One. I'll say to Jehovah, you are my refuge and my stronghold, my God in whom I will trust. You see, there it is again. Taking the right stand on the issue of sovereignty, recognizing that our God has every right to give direction in our lives, to show what we should do, and recognizing also that if we're going to appreciate Jehovah's sovereignty, we can't wait for him to give us personal orders, because he very seldom does something like that. Rather, he deals with us in a way that the devil says won't work. And what's that? He appeals to us on the basis of love. And because of his love for us, demonstrated in so many ways, he has the confidence that he indicates to be his will. And so he doesn't have to deal constantly giving orders, acting as a dictator to us, but rather very lovingly shows what his will is, and he has confidence that people who love him with all their heart and mind and soul and strength, well, they're just going to move in there and say, Jehovah, if that's what you want done, I want to have a share. What can I do? And they respond to the organization and make themselves available. One area that affords opportunity to demonstrate our trust in Jehovah is our attitude toward material things. Jehovah, interestingly, teaches us an outlook on life that enables us to make the best use of our lives. It contributes to real happiness, and it also requires that we have complete trust in him. It's a very interesting combination. Now, Jehovah does not tell us what kind of house to live in. That's up to us. Do we want a brick house, a wood house, a stucco house? We want 1 room, 3 rooms, 5. What we work out in that regard, he leaves up to us to choose. And there's no place in the Bible he says one kind of house is acceptable and the other isn't. We select it. Of course, there's also that circumstance of being able to obtain it. As to how many hours of work we do, he doesn't tell us that either, does he? That's up to us. Now, some can work fewer hours than others because they've gotten into a certain line of work that enables them to do that, and they have abilities, natural abilities, that makes that possible. Others find that they need to work longer hours. They feel that they do, and Jehovah leaves that up to us. We choose. He doesn't say, you must, you mustn't, you should, you shouldn't. Rather, these things we work out. But in Matthew chapter 13, verse 22, through his Son, he just gives us a word of caution. Here's a parable of the sower. Jesus talked about the seed, the word of the kingdom, falling on various kinds of soil, that is, taking lodgment in hearts that reflected various desires. And verse 22 says, as for the one sown among the thorns, this is the one hearing the word, but the anxiety of this system of things and the deceptive power of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. Now, very interesting. He's saying, be careful, because when you go to providing a house for yourself and working out your secular work and caring for all your obligations, if you get to worrying too much about the problems of life, he said, you can really get the kingdom choked out of your life. And if you get to feeling that material possessions or money and what it'll obtain for you is more important than it really is, he said, you can get hurt. So it's just a kindly word of caution, but he doesn't tell us how to resolve all the problems in our life. He just says, be careful, it's a difficult field. But now, if we get Jehovah's view of the matter, we can enjoy a freedom that we never had before. Now, that doesn't mean that we become indifferent about our obligations to provide materially. Because in Ephesians chapter 4, we're told to be willing to work with our hands. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, he encourages us not to be freeloaders, but not to impose an expensive burden on others, not to expect others to carry the load for us, but look after our families, look after our needs, be willing to shoulder it. 1 Timothy chapter 5, he lets us know we have the responsibility to care for our families. And he says that includes not just your children, but also your elderly parents and grandparents if they fall into need in their later years. But while telling us that we ought to be willing to work and that we ought to shoulder our responsibility in this regard, in 1 Timothy chapter 6 he says, be careful. He said, even while you're doing all this, with sustenance and covering, be content. Now, if you start going after a whole lot more than that, you're going to get hurt. To put it in frank language, the way he puts it is, you'll stab yourself all over with many pains. Well, what happens if you take a knife and you start stabbing yourself? You get hurt, don't you? That's another way of putting it. So he says, if you start reaching out for too much, you're going to get hurt. And of course, that doesn't make good sense. Nobody wants to hurt himself, and Jehovah warns us. So he gives us some basic principles on life, the way he looks at it, and the way he encourages us to walk. If you'll turn with me to Matthew chapter 6, verse 11, I'm going to read the verse, and I'd like to invite you to comment on some of these verses. I'd like you to select the basic principle of life that's stated in this verse. Matthew 6, verse 11. Give us today our bread for this day. How much does he tell us to be concerned about? What is he saying? Someone tell us? Please, this is for you. Yes, Brother Brown. One day at a time. Now, do we live that way? Do we live? The world doesn't. commercialism is designed to prevent you from thinking about one day at a time. They want you to plan ahead for the week, for the month, for the year, have a nest egg in the bank, think about when you're going to get old. Now that's getting way beyond one day at a time, isn't it? He says, look, let's go back to the one day, all right? You're alive, you have the things you need for today. Why are you worrying about tomorrow? Now remember, Jesus also said that if we allow the anxiety of this system of things to begin working on us, it's going to choke our spirituality. Now, as to how far it chokes us, well, that depends on how far we let it go, you see. It may throttle it to a considerable extent, and there still is some spirituality about us, but if we get back to that basic principle, it might cause a spiritual growth that would amaze us, simply because we begin to apply that basic Bible principle that we've known ever since we were little kids, and that the world in general does not apply. Yes, give us our bread for this day, and don't worry about where it's going to come from for tomorrow. Take care of today. Got to admit, you've really got to trust Jehovah to do that in this world, don't you? Still in the same chapter of Matthew, I'd like you to state the principle here. I'm going to start with verse 31. So never be anxious and say, what are we to eat, or what are we to drink, or what are we to put on? For all these are the things the nations are eagerly pursuing. For your heavenly Father knows you need all these things. Keep on then seeking first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. All right, now what about our priorities in life? What principle do you see stated here? Yes, brother. The kingdom comes first. And it's interesting, first in relationship to what? Well, first in relationship to our providing food and something to drink. Isn't that what it was talking about up there in verse 31? At the end it says, now those that do it the other way, well, those are the nations. But it's saying you who really trust in Jehovah, keep on seeking first the kingdom and his righteousness, and if we really do it, what will happen? Well, he says these other things that the world spends 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, all their life working for, Jehovah says that'll be added to you without being a slave to this old system of things. It's very interesting. This is what Jehovah is promising. Do we trust him? It's another principle. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. Proverbs 3, 9 and 10. Honor Jehovah with your valuable things, and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your stores of supply will be filled with plenty, and with new wine your own press vats will overflow. Now that's very interesting. Jehovah is telling us, he's speaking about material things, obviously. The principle can extend to other matters, but we're talking about material things right now, and this verse is. Jehovah says, honor him with your valuable things and the first fruits of all your produce. So he says, from whatever you get, whatever you have, in a material way, use the first fruits to honor Jehovah, to advance the interests of pure worship, to advance kingdom interests. Now, he doesn't tell us how much, does he? That's up to us. That's the way Jehovah deals with us. He simply says, well, do it according to what's in your heart. That's all. But one thing he is saying is take the first fruits and give it. Now, he doesn't say, make sure you got plenty to take care of everything for the months to come, and if you got anything left, well then be sure that you use something to advance kingdom interest. No, Jehovah is saying, if you trust me, He says, when you receive the material things that come from your activity, your work, your employment, he says, out of what your heart moves you to do, take the first fruits and you give that to advance kingdom interests. And there are many ways that we can do that. It may be in the Kingdom Hall, it may be in our Assembly Hall funds, it can be in helping those in foreign service. There's so many things, but he leaves it up to us. But he says, use the first fruits, and then what does he promise? Verse 10, then your stores of supply will be filled with plenty, and with new wine your own press vats will overflow. Very interesting. Again, he says, you trust me, and you use the first fruits this way, and I guarantee you'll have the things you need, and you're not going to go without. Now that takes faith, doesn't it? It really takes faith. Can a person really live that way? What reasons do we have for confidence? Well, we think of the nation of Israel when they left Egypt. They were out in the wilderness. Now, Jehovah had not just one person, he had a whole nation of them. Several million of them out there in a wilderness, no crops planted, no business going for income. They were just there. And why were they there? Because he told them to go there. So there they are. No shopping centers, no crops. Did he look after them? We know he did. Manna, quail, he provided for them for 40 years out in that wilderness. Later, when they got into the promised land, Jehovah told them 3 times a year, I want all the males to go to Jerusalem for the festival. Well, now, after a little while, you know, the surrounding nations would learn about this, and those nations had greedy eyes on that land. Jehovah says, don't worry about it. He says, I'll make sure they don't want your land while you're away. He says, you do what I say, go down to Jerusalem, and it'll be all right. And it was. That land was never invaded while they were away to festivals in Jerusalem until the year 70 CE. And then what happened? The Roman armies moved in and cooped them up in Jerusalem, and there was a terrible slaughter. Why? Why did it happen? They never should have been down there for that festival. The reason they were there in the year 70 is they didn't trust Jehovah. Jehovah had sent his son, who fulfilled those types under the law. They had killed his son. They didn't believe in the fulfillment of the law, and so now Jehovah left them at the mercy of the nation. And look what happened. But when they trusted him, they never came to harm during that festival time. Do you remember in the days of Elijah, famine came in the land. Hard times economically for everyone, including those in full-time service. What did Jehovah say? Elijah, go over here to the Torrent Valley. I'm going to make the water flow there for you so you've got some water to drink, and I'll send you some food out there. And he sent it out by Bird Express. Delivered it, dropped it off for him. He always had something to eat while others were having problems. After a while, he said, I want you to leave here and want you to go up to the north. And in this particular locality, you're going to find a woman, and I'm going to command her to look after you and see that you have something to eat. He went up there. As he came in, he saw a widow out there gathering some sticks, and he said, may I please have a drink of water? And as she was going to get the water, he called after her, and would you bring me some bread, please? And she turned back and said, but all I have is just a little flour and a little oil, and here I was gathering these sticks to go make the last meal for my son and myself, and we'd eat it and just die because there is nothing else. And Elijah said, now don't have any fear. Go and do as I said, and make some for me first. You see, the first fruits, again, that principle. Make some for me first, And according to the commandment of Jehovah, your jar of flour and your jar of oil will never be empty all the days of the famine in the land. And that's what happened. Now, that's what Jehovah does. And he's put these accounts in the Bible, one right after the other. And why is it there? So we'll believe it. So that even under difficult circumstances, we won't say, times are different today. Back there it was something else. But today, this world, times are hard. They were hard back there. Jehovah is just saying, trust me, and you'll enjoy a blessing. Well, does he do this sort of thing today? Let's get up into our day. I remember as a young man when I learned the lesson. I was pioneering north of Chicago. I had some money I had saved when I was going to school, and I used it to pay the rent, used it for buying groceries, caring for other needs, and as long as I had it, I used it. And I remember the day came when I wanted to go to a convention. The funds were running low. I left for the convention. I took what money I had. I had to let my room go. I couldn't pay the rent and get to the convention. I made the trip. I came back, got to my pioneer assignment. It was an isolated area. When I pulled into town that night, I didn't have a room. I was driving an old car. I had $1 in my pocket. The bank account was empty now. And I was a young man, and sleeping in the back seat of the car that night was no big problem to me. I just locked the door and parked in the railroad parking lot, slept, woke up in the morning. Now I began thinking, well, what am I going to do today? And I remember thinking, well, there are several things that need attention. I do need to get out in field service. I need to do something about secular work. I need to find a place to stay. And I've got $1 in my pocket. So where do I start? And that scripture in Matthew 6, verse 33 came to my mind. Now, I had learned it as a child at home, but now I was confronted with a situation where, as it were, it seemed like Jehovah was reminding me, well, that's what the scripture says. So I thought, all right, that's what Jehovah says, that's what we're going to do. So I started out in the field service that morning. I worked all morning up until noon, and I had the worst morning in field service I had ever had. Nobody wanted to talk to me. I couldn't give them any literature. And I got to noon, and I was a little bit discouraged. I was getting hungry now, and so I took that $1 and I put 50 cents worth of gas in the gas tank. I could still get some gas for that amount back then. And the other 50 cents I spent on food, and I ate the food, and now it was all gone. So I went back out in the territory, and I worked all afternoon. I started about 1 o'clock. Again, the afternoon, all afternoon. It was just like the morning. Nobody. They wouldn't even smile. It was one of those days where nobody would respond, no matter what kind of approach I tried. The calls I had to make, they didn't seem to be home. And finally, at 5 o'clock, a woman invited me in. Sat down in the living room, talked to her a few minutes. She said, I used to get those magazines in the mail. I asked her, would you like to have them again? Yes. So I wrote up the 2 subscriptions. Now, that was the first placement for the day. Well, I thought, well, this woman's at least friendly. I'm going to tell her I'm looking for a place to stay. So I did. I told her I was looking for a place to stay as I carried on my ministry in the community, and wondered if she had a suggestion. I didn't ask her if she had a place. Before she answered, a man in the other room whom I had never met called out, Mrs. Deegan, may I speak to you, please? And she excused herself and went in the other room. She didn't shut the door, so I could hear the conversation as that elderly man told her, Mrs. Deegan, don't turn that man away. He's doing God's work. See that he has a place to stay. And if he can't pay for it, I will. And I can still hear that elderly gentleman speak. I got acquainted with him later, was able to help him in a spiritual way. She took me upstairs, showed me a lovely room, asked if it would be all right. It was beautiful. And I asked her how much it would be. Well, she said, is $30 a month too much? Well, that wasn't for something like that in that part of town. And I told her, well, no, it's very nice. And almost as if she knew I didn't have anything, she said, and you don't need to pay me now. The end of the week will be all right. And as we walked out of the room, she said, and if you'll leave your laundry on Monday, I'll take care of it with the rest here in the house. And as we got downstairs, she said, and we do hope you'll take your meals with us while you're here. Now, all that within $1 a day, and the first week all cared for without having to pay anything till the end of the week. Well, I learned something that day. One thing I learned is that, yes, Jehovah does care for you if you put the kingdom first, but I also learned that he believes in letting you work, too. He doesn't give it to you any earlier in the day than you need it. And I didn't need a place to sleep until it got around toward evening, and I really hadn't run out of money, and I didn't need a meal until this time. I could have taken care of everything beautifully up to this point, but when I got to the point when I really needed it, and having genuinely put the kingdom first, Jehovah really did what he said. That was an education for me, and had quite an effect on my future viewpoint toward life and Jehovah's service. But over the years, I've heard other experiences that have greatly impressed me as to what Jehovah has done, the circumstances under which he's done it. 83, 84, and 86 years of age. Catholic. Came in touch with Jehovah's Witnesses. They were living dependent on the Catholic Church. The housing was given them by the church. The food was distributed by the church. They had nothing. They started to study the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses. It sounded wonderful. They learned just a little bit. They were so hungry they started to read ahead. And they just lapped it up, eager to learn these things, even though in the later years of life they thought, this is what we've been looking for. Well, it wasn't long before they learned what Babylon the Great is. The next day, the priest came around distributing the food. When he got to the door, they met him. They said, we have learned who you are. And in no uncertain terms, they told him that he was part of Babylon the Great, and God told his people to get out of her. And he looked at them as if they must be crazy and said, do you know where you live? Do you know whose house this is? Do you know where your food comes from? Who do you think is going to care for you? Do you think God is just going to give you the food you need? And they looked him square in the eye and said, maybe your God wouldn't, but Jehovah will. And with that, they shut the door. That week, some mail arrived. They didn't expect it. 3 letters, one for each, from the Spanish government. Each letter explaining, we've been endeavoring to get in contact with you for a considerable period of time. Your husband is a veteran of military service under the Spanish government. As a widow, you're entitled to a pension. The first check is enclosed. There's a considerable sum that is now owing to you, and the rest will be sent if you acknowledge receipt of this check. Each one of the 3 received it. Who do you think provided that? Jehovah did. Isn't that true? stayed some time ago with a sister up in New England, a widow who was raising a number of young boys, teaching them to love and serve Jehovah. Her husband had left her over the truth, but this sister was trying to do what would please God. She had to work hard to feed her boys. One day at work, her employer said, "I'm awfully sorry. Work has been slow. We just don't have anything. We're going to have to lay a number of you off." And she was laid off along with others. As that sister started walking home that night, she knew what it meant. She had no bank account. She had just what she received week by week. Sister simply said, "Thank you, Jehovah." She went on into the house, sat down, was having supper with the family. As they ate, someone knocked at the door. A man who was a baker in the community. Rather apologetic, he said, "I'm sorry to interrupt your supper, but," he said, "I wonder if you would be willing to help me." He said, "You know, I've worked at the bakery there for many years, but I'm getting older now, and I'm finding it very hard to get up early in the morning to light the ovens, to get them warm so that they're ready to bake when it comes time." And he said, "I'm looking for someone I could trust, someone I could give them the keys to the place, and who would go over and dependably light the ovens in the morning and just get them started, that's all, so that when I come in, everything is ready for my work." He said, "Would you be willing to do something like that?" He said, "I'll pay you well for it." And our sister, again, accepted with thanks to Jehovah. And the man then proceeded to add, seeing she was so willing and so appreciative, said, "And since you're doing this," he said, "in addition to what I pay you, I want you to know that you can take all the baked goods you need for your boys. I know you've got a growing family there, and they have appetites, I can see. Just help yourself to anything you need there in the bakery for the family." How wonderfully Jehovah cares for his people. Now, this sister was not in the full-time service. The reason she wasn't in full-time service wasn't because she didn't want to be. She was teaching her children to put kingdom interest first, and she was herself. And later on found herself free when those children grew up to be able to do more in Jehovah's service. But she simply applied the principles in the circumstance in life in which she found herself. Appreciation of these things has moved many, many of our brothers into full-time service. And it's not only in lands such as the United States, Great Britain, Canada, Japan, where this is true. In lands where the work of Jehovah's people is under ban, it's very interesting to observe how many are sharing in the pioneer service. And when it comes along to those months for special auxiliary pioneer service, when all who are able to share are encouraged to do so, do you know that there are lands where the work of Jehovah's Witnesses is banned, where 30% enroll as auxiliary pioneers, where 50%, where up to 70% of our brothers and sisters auxiliary pioneer, and yet they're working in lands where just to go out in field service you can be thrown into jail for it because the work of Jehovah's Witnesses is banned. They trust in Jehovah with all their heart. Some of those brothers and sisters who enroll as auxiliary pioneers start out their month sharing in the territory where they customarily work, and they end up the month auxiliary pioneering in jail. But one place or the other, there are people, and they talk to those people. They're using their time in doing the will of Jehovah, whom they love with all their heart. This outlook on material things, this trust in Jehovah, on the part of his servants is also making it possible to care for the needs of a rapidly growing organization. On an average, last year, according to the yearbook, there were 15,000 persons every month who dedicated their lives to Jehovah. We're talking about the world. In the world, 15,000 a month got baptized last year. That means 5 congregations of 100 publishers each every day of the service year. That's according to the last yearbook that all of us have. That was the rate of increase then, and the reports from everywhere indicate it's been going up since then. But what does it mean? It means they need kingdom halls. They need assembly halls. They need Bibles. They need literature to study. And this calls for more facilities with which to work. What have our brothers done? Well, I was talking to one of the sisters here today. She told me she was from Anchorage, Alaska. She no doubt remembers what happened up there not long ago when our brothers built a large Kingdom Hall facility, and they needed the help of brothers to do that construction work. And there were hundreds that came by plane and by automobile from the United States and Canada, as well as from up there in Alaska, converged on the locality, did the job, put up the building so our brothers there would have the facilities to meet together for their worship. Now, outside of the first meeting that they all attend on that weekend when they're doing the building work, most of those brothers and sisters will never use that Kingdom Hall. They didn't work on it because that's going to be their Kingdom Hall. They worked on it because they felt if Jehovah is blessing the work in that territory, we're interested in it. He's interested, we're interested. They need help, I can help, I'm going to help. And they went and they worked hard. They worked long hours, and there were lovely results that came from it. Recently in Ireland, the first quick-build Kingdom Hall in Ireland was put up in just 31 hours. 50 brothers went up there from England, and the local brothers worked along with them. And when it was done, the local community, absolutely amazed, in their newspaper put a big black headline: "The house that Jehovah built in 31 hours." And they stated the truth of it, didn't they? Because that's why that house was built. Down in Martinique in the Caribbean, our brothers needed a new branch to care for their facilities. Again, they couldn't do it themselves. They needed help. So where did it come from? The brothers in Canada and Quebec talk French like they do down in Martinique. They heard our brothers in Martinique need some help. Let's go. And so they flew from Canada down to Martinique, worked hard to help put up those new branch facilities. A brother in France, who's an architect, learning of the need, contributed his effort in that direction to provide what was required to build that new branch facility. Each one just giving of himself, giving of his ability, paying their own way to get there and back, and working day and night when they're there, but taking real pleasure in sharing in this way to advance kingdom interests. Out in Papua New Guinea, our brothers have needed new branch facilities. Again, they didn't have the abilities locally with which to do the job. Down in Australia, not too far away, the brothers heard of the need. 240 of them went over to Papua New Guinea to help build these new branch facilities. In Ghana, down in Africa, the brothers needed new branch facilities. 2 brothers from the Brooklyn staff were sent down to help work with the local brothers to see that they got a good job done and they had the supervision needed. There are worldly people down there who have looked at that building and said as it's nearing its completion, this is the finest building in Ghana. And it's an evidence of Jehovah's Spirit at work in the lives of his people. In Nigeria, Our brothers have had wonderful results. There are over 120,000 publishers there now. They need new branch facilities. They finally got the property after much difficulty, but they couldn't get the materials to build a branch because of the economic situation in the country. So they let the problem be known to the governing body. Arrangements were made here in the United States to design the building and to provide what was required. Our brothers down in Nigeria went to the government and got permission to import 6 prefabricated buildings. Now imagine it. They're importing a big office building, they're importing a factory, a huge factory, they're importing residence buildings and the other buildings that are necessary. Prefabricated. Much of that work being done here on the West Coast. Some of it coming from Mississippi, some of it coming from up in Wisconsin. There are brothers that have gone down from England. There are others who came to Brooklyn as temporary workers to help there, who are learning of the need down in Nigeria, volunteered to go down there and work for a few months. They're all giving of themselves. If that's where Jehovah is prospering the work, then, like Abraham, they say, Lord, we're ready to go. Their home, their secular work, their relatives, they're leaving behind, they're going to where Jehovah directs, and they are being a blessing. And Jehovah is certainly blessing their efforts. At Brooklyn, we're feeling the effects of this growth, and temporary workers are coming in from most of the states here in the United States to help out. And they're coming with a willingness to do anything that's needed. It's delightful to see the spirit they show. Many of these volunteer workers are finding that they have muscles that they forgot all about, and they learn about after they've been there for a few days. One of the sisters, learning that her husband planned to go, decided it would be good to help him get in shape, and so she had him paint the house before he left, just so it wouldn't all be new to him. Anyway, one way or the other, the brothers are getting down there and they're sharing in the work for a week, 2 weeks, a month. Many of them, they're staying as long as they can. Some of them come for a week. At the end of the week, they're asking, when can I come back? They weren't too sure what it would be like, but they find spiritually it's a real delight, a blessing. They're working hard, they're making a valuable contribution. They in turn are receiving a blessing. Now these brothers all pay their own way to get there. Interestingly, some brothers came up from Louisiana to help with the construction work there in Brooklyn. And as they finished their time in Brooklyn, one of the brothers took them out to the airport to go back home, and he asked them on the way, will you be coming back? Well, the brothers said, if I do, Jehovah's going to have to buy me the ticket because I spent everything I had to get here the first time. They got out to the airport. They were waiting for their flight. An announcement came over the speaker system, named his flight, said, we're very sorry, but the flight is overbooked. We're looking for volunteers to go on a later flight. They waited a while. Announcement came again, repeated the same, but said, if any would volunteer to go on a later flight, we will give you a free round-trip ticket, plus $100 for expenses. 2 of our brothers stepped up to the counter, and they said, we'll take them if you take both of us. Just a couple months ago, I met one of those brothers. He was back again. He knew what that ticket was for, and he knew who gave it to him. He wasn't thanking the airlines. He was thanking Jehovah for making the provision so he could share again in doing what his heart really moved him to do. Another one of our brothers, very eager to share in the work, filled out an application. He sent it in from the Midwest, and he got the answer, and he realized at this point that he hadn't counted the cost very carefully because he really didn't have the money to get there to Brooklyn at all. And here he was looking at the letter and just thinking, what a shame. Here, I've been invited now. The brothers have given me dates to come, and I should have thought the thing out before I moved. And while he was thinking about it, somebody came knocking on the door. A man had just been driving past the house. He stopped, turned around, came back. He said, I saw a big rubber raft out in your backyard. I'm looking for one to buy. Would you be willing to sell it? Well, the brother said, it's kind of dark now. It's evening. Why don't you come back in the morning and look at it and see what it's like? He said, okay, I'll be here. He came back early the next morning, went out and looked at it. Now, the brother hadn't used the thing for a couple of years. This man looked at it. He says, that's exactly what I want. What he paid for it was exactly what that brother needed for his round-trip ticket to come down there to share in the work. But you see the point, brothers, that if our desire is to put the kingdom interests first, if that's where our heart is, Jehovah will help with these other things. He says it in his word, doesn't he? He says it again and again. If we'll just put him to the test and show that we have the faith to act in harmony with his promises. We live at a time of marvelous expansion, and it's thrilling to see and have a part in it. But we also need to face the fact that some are getting up in years, others have very limited resources of health, and it may seem to them that what they can do is very little. It takes a great deal of effort. Is it worth it? Does it really make a difference? Should we keep pushing to do all we can in Jehovah's service? There was a sister who years ago was sent down to Chile as a missionary. Her welcome to her missionary assignment was that she was struck with illness almost as soon as she got there. Illness that caused her to lose her hair and her hearing. She didn't know the local language, and it's rather hard to learn when you can't hear other people speak. The language was not her own. Well, our sister thought about her situation and said, well, Jehovah wouldn't have sent me here if he didn't have something for me to do. He must want me here, and he can help me do it, so I'm just going to start in and do it. So, and she stayed. She prepared a presentation. She said it in Spanish the way she thought Spanish ought to be said. And she figured, well, if I don't say it right, they'll figure I'm a gringo and they'll forgive me for it, and so it's all right. She'd go to them and talk, and when she'd see they were saying something, she didn't really know what they were saying at first, but she figured, well, now normally when I used to give this in English, if I was talking about this, people would raise this kind of objection. So maybe that's what she's saying, and proceed to answer that. And she didn't understand when people were saying they weren't interested either, and so she'd just keep on talking to them, and they figured, well, this poor North American, she doesn't even know the language, and so, but she's trying hard, so very tolerantly they would stand there and listen. And over a period of years, that dear sister has aided over 100 people to become servants of Jehovah in that country, because she recognized that, yes, Jehovah wanted her in that assignment, and if she would stay with it, she could be a blessing as well as receive a blessing. There's another sister I know, not as old, but had problems of health that made it a real struggle for her every day. It wasn't just once in a while that there was a headache, but every day doing anything was in agony, physically and otherwise. This sister was a member of the Bethel family. When this illness overtook her, she had been there for about 15 years, but she determined this is my assignment of service to Jehovah. She always went down to morning worship. Every day she showed up at work. For a while she couldn't stay very long. Then she found that she could work just a little longer each day. Gradually it's improved. Why did she keep pushing? Why go to work when you can only last for 15 minutes or a half an hour, and it's going to make you very sick for the rest of the day because of the effort you put forth? Well, she had a card on her desk. It quoted a scripture from Proverbs 27. Be wise, my son. And she had inserted, and my daughter, and make my heart rejoice, that I may make a reply to him that is taunting me. As that sister said on many occasions, I love Jehovah. I love his ways. There's nothing else I'd rather do with my life. And this was her way of saying, thank you, Jehovah. Another one of our sisters that I know went to Barbados as a missionary some years ago. She worked hard. She was well known in the territory. Some time ago, she had a stroke. She was confined to a wheelchair. She lost her speech. What would she do? This sister felt, I'm still a missionary. When others would go out in the field service, she got in her wheelchair and made it known that she wanted to go with them. They'd take her out in the territory. She couldn't talk. She could just sit there in her chair. But she'd sit there and look at the householder and smile. It's all she could do. But those people, because of her service, knew what she believed. They could see what had happened to her. But they could also tell by her facial expression, she has something wonderful. It's giving her joy in life. And obviously it's what she believes. And this would fortify the witness of the one who was talking at the door. That was her contribution. Was it worth the effort? How do you feel? Is it worth that kind of effort in Jehovah's service? Do you feel it is? Does Jehovah appreciate something like that? Well, if he approved a widow in Jerusalem who contributed just 2 coins of small value because it was all that she had, we know that he also smiles with approval on those faithful servants of God who, because of advanced years or problems of health, aren't able to give as much as they did, but are giving all that they can because they love Jehovah with all their heart. Now, some of us do enjoy reasonably good health. We're still able to do a full day's work, and our test of integrity and loyalty to Jehovah, our trust in him, may be shown in another way. How so? Well, the test may be simply to do what Jehovah directs through his organization, even if we personally don't see great results. Not all of us work in territories where people are welcoming us in and asking for a Bible study very often. We may go out in territories where we're finding it very difficult even to place magazines on a Saturday. Do you find that's true sometimes? Where you may go quite a distance before you're able to give a Bible presentation at the door. A pioneer from Colorado told me not long ago that in their territory nearly all the Bible studies are being conducted with children of Jehovah's Witnesses. He says they can't get them with others in the territory. Well, why is he pioneering? Why put forth all the effort? because he's demonstrating his devotion to Jehovah. That's why. It offers others the opportunity, but they have to be willing to accept. Up in Scandinavia, in some places, our brothers face a similar problem. The people are not interested in God and the Bible. And yet you read the reports and the pioneer activity keeps going up. Why? Well, it isn't because of the response in the field, but it's because of the love that's growing in the hearts of the brothers that moves them out to that increased activity. Ezekiel faced a situation involving a similar test. Ezekiel chapter 33 tells about it. Over 10 years before Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians, they besieged the city and sent large numbers into captivity. Daniel was among them, also Ezekiel. About 5 years later, while Ezekiel was in the district of Babylon by the river Kibar, Jehovah gave him a special assignment. And in Ezekiel 33, starting with verse 7, he said, "Now as regards you, O son of man, a watchman is what I have made you to the house of Israel. And at my mouth you must hear the word and give them warning from me. When I say to someone wicked, O wicked one, you'll positively die. But you actually do not speak out to warn the wicked one from his wicked way. He himself, as a wicked one, will die in his error, but his blood I shall ask back at your own hand." Now, who's he talking about here? He's saying you're to be a watchman to the house of Israel. When destruction comes, then if you haven't warned them, you have to answer for it. But he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. It wasn't this village up by the river Kibar that was going to be besieged that he was talking about. It's Jerusalem. And Ezekiel wasn't even in Jerusalem. Verse 9 continues, "But as regards you, in case you actually warn someone wicked from his way, for him to turn back from it, but he actually does not turn back from his way, he himself will die in his own error, whereas you yourself will certainly deliver your own soul." Now, how does that make sense? Why would Jehovah tell Ezekiel, "I'm making you a watchman to the house of Israel, and you give warning so that when destruction comes on Jerusalem, which is about 500 miles away, I don't hold you accountable up here by the river Kibar"? How could that be? Well, maybe Ezekiel wondered. Jehovah didn't explain it. He just told him, "You give warning." Ezekiel did it. The Bible shows he did. Communications between Babylon and Jerusalem were reasonably good back then. Now, they had no telephones, it's true. They had no automobiles. They didn't have any airplanes. But there were regular caravans that traveled the Fertile Crescent. And when people would hear news up there in Babylon, they'd hear what this prophet was talking about. They would carry that news the route and down there into Jerusalem. And when they stopped there, they'd say, "You know, this fellow Jeremiah, he's talking the same thing that we heard him talking about up there in Babylon." And it would reinforce the warning down there in Jerusalem. Thus the Israelites in both Babylon and in Judah were warned. Now, not all listened, but some did. Well, now, sometimes today as we go about our work, we may wonder, well, who are we touching really? Who's being affected? Who's being helped? Well, Jehovah, through his organization, shows us how to go about the work. And sometimes we go out for a day, a week, a month, and nothing may seem to happen. And we may say, well, really, what am I accomplishing? We're accomplishing a great deal if we listen to Jehovah and his organization. Down in Senegal, there's a vast amount of unassigned territory. Our brothers have been unable to get into it. Through the organization, encouragement was given to do witnessing at train stations and at taxi stops. And our brothers started to do that in the cities where they were located. Now, maybe it seemed, well, that's taken a lot of effort. I've got territory I could work, but the brothers did it. What happened? One man was witnessed to at one of these train stations early in the morning. He got a piece of literature. He traveled far back into the interior in an area where there were no witnesses. He read the piece of literature he had. He wrote to the branch. He asked for more. He got a stack of those brochures, Enjoy Life on Earth Forever. 25, if I recall. This man was a school teacher, and he decided that he was going to use this for religious and moral instruction to the students in school. Now, no witnesses in this area, mind you, but he takes this brochure and uses it for class instruction. It comes the school recess period, and he tells the children, I want you to take that brochure home. I want you all to read it during your vacation time, and I want each one of you to make a personal copy of it in Arabic. Well, now, do you see what's starting to happen out in that territory? Well, now, this man has another friend who also is a teacher, and he told him about it. That man wrote and got 40 brochures, and he's going to do the same thing in his territory, in his school, for the children there. Why did it happen? Because there was a brother who listened when Jehovah said, get up early, please, and go down and talk to those people at the train station. And the brother did it. He trusted Jehovah in the direction through his organization. The organization has encouraged us to do many things. We've been encouraged to send gift subscriptions, for example, to friends, relatives, many times. A brother did this. He sent it to his sister. She never read it. Never took the wrapper off. Threw them all in the closet. A waste? Well, she had a daughter who one day started digging through the closet and found all these magazines wrapped up. She pulled off the wrapper and started to read them. She was fascinated by what was in them. She wanted more. She wrote a letter. She got a copy of the Truth book. She went through Gilead School and out into foreign missionary service. Why? Well, because a brother listened. When Jehovah said through his organization, this is a good way to reach people, instead of thinking, my sister isn't interested, she won't read it, he just did what Jehovah said, do, and good results came. Another brother was working on construction up in Quebec. He'd been encouraged to do informal witnessing on the job. Well, one day he was working inside, other men were working outside, and they were a loudmouth bunch and cursing and swearing. It started to rain, and they started to curse and abuse their references to God. And the brother inside, well, now you could react in a variety of ways. You could just withdraw from the whole thing. But our brother, very tactfully, opened the window, stuck his head out, looked up at these fellows that were swearing and saying, did you know that God has another name? And then he shut the window. Well, that really got their curiosity up. And one thing led to the other in discussions with those fellow workers on the job who had never shown interest up to this time. 7 of them came into the truth. Why? Simply because he saw an opportunity to give just a little witness. Jehovah is bringing in an increase now that's unprecedented in the history of his visible organization. We can have a share in it if we're content to do things his way. If we just do our part, Jehovah is using us as a unified organization to accomplish his will. maybe you personally don't have a Bible study. Maybe you've been trying to get one. Maybe someone else has one. But have you been sharing faithfully in the ministry over the years? When someone else has a Bible study, you have a share in it. Why? These people who today are accepting Bible studies, many of them have been called on 100 times over the years. Nearly everyone in the congregation has knocked on their door and made just a little impression each time. Well, finally, someone came who spoke of a Bible study, and the person was willing. Now, maybe you offered it before. Maybe someone else offered it before. But they've been thinking about it all this time, and now someone has the privilege of conducting that study. When they come down to the Kingdom Hall, one person has the joy of bringing them. But why is it they come back? Often it's because 100 people at the Kingdom Hall are friendly. Isn't that true? Now, those 100 aren't conducting the study. But if only the one who conducted the study was friendly, do you think they'd be back for the next meeting? It's the love they see that you show that draws them back. So every time any individual progresses to the point of dedication and baptism, we can rejoice if we have been doing what God has directed, because we personally have had a share, and we're seeing that increase that Jehovah is bringing. Not through any one of us, but through the organization of which each one of us is a part. May we always take pleasure in doing God's will in that way. Our trust in Jehovah is our having full confidence in the fulfillment of His promises. Consider, though, what that involves. We've often opened the Bible to Isaiah chapter 13 with a prophecy regarding the desolation of ancient Babylon. And we've pointed out how marvelous it is, how the details all worked out. And we've gone over to Isaiah chapter 44 and showed people even the name of the conqueror is there. And we've used this to strengthen faith. But for a moment, put yourself on the other side. What if you were alive when Isaiah gave that prophecy? It was 200 years before the conqueror showed up. Now, when he conquered Babylon, it didn't happen the way it said in chapter 13 in all the details, because it said there, Babylon will become like Sodom and Gomorrah. And in the days of Cyrus, it did not become like Sodom and Gomorrah. Babylon continued to be a thriving city right down into the Common Era. In the first century, Peter was carrying on missionary work in Babylon, wasn't he? It wasn't until about 1,000 years after that prophecy was given that Babylon became a desolate waste. Eventually, every detail in that prophecy worked out. And today, Babylon continues desolate. But it didn't all come at once, did it? A part of it in one point, a part later, the rest later on. But Jehovah's Word proved true. Now, had we been living back then, how would we have felt as it unfolded very slowly, not everything all at once? Would we have trusted in Jehovah with all our heart? And when part of it happened, would we have been strengthened in faith and said, I know the rest of it's coming, and even if it didn't, in the time period we expected, would our faith remain strong? Brothers, we're in a situation like that today. We see Jehovah's purpose unfolding. We see thrilling events taking place. We get anxious to see the end of it too, don't we? We get anxious to see this old world go down and the righteous new system come in. We're very eager. But we're also eager to see people benefit from Jehovah's loving provisions. And we're glad to see them taking hold of the truth now while there's opportunity. This year, we're watching to see what's going to happen in October. Why, we hear tell that the nations are going to say something about international peace. And we know the Bible says something about that too. And we just kind of wonder what's going to happen. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. What if it all just turned out to be a big publicity campaign that they said, well, we're maintaining world peace, but it didn't really prove to be what Jehovah had foretold? Well, after all their big publicity to it, if Armageddon didn't strike promptly, would we be disappointed? Or would we look at that and say, well, that wasn't quite Jehovah's time yet. They tried, but it wasn't Jehovah's time. When Jehovah's time comes, it's going to happen exactly the way he says. Jehovah is going to fulfill his promise right down to the last letter. It may not happen just the way we figure it out in our mind, but if we think his way, we remember that we don't know the day or the hour, but we have confidence that Jehovah is a God of truth, and all the things he says, he will accomplish. Brothers, this is the way your brothers around the earth feel. They share your trust in Jehovah. And I'd like to tell you that it's a pleasure for the Bethel family to be working along with all of you here today. And the Bethel family is keenly interested in you. I know that because as a member of the Bethel family at morning worship, I hear the prayers that are offered day after day, and I wish you could, because you brothers and sisters are included in those prayers. The brothers at Bethel have been family men, many of them as you are. They've been young folks and gone to school, and they know the problems that you confront. And day after day in their prayers, they ask for Jehovah to strengthen you as you cope with those situations, and to bless your efforts as you participate in the field ministry. They love you very, very much. They're part of one family, working shoulder to shoulder with you. And the heartfelt desire of the headquarters family there in Brooklyn is that every one of you will prove to be worthy of Jehovah's blessing of life in his righteous new order. No matter what the circumstances that confront us in the days ahead, may we continue to work together unitedly. May all of us prove to be persons who trust in Jehovah with all their heart and do not lean on their own understanding.
Well, I'm sure I speak for all of us in expressing appreciation to Brother Adams for helping us to better and more fully appreciate what is involved in trusting in Jehovah with all our heart. We appreciate that, and along with those very heartwarming words of encouragement that he shared with us. We were thinking, too, that all of us here would no doubt very much like Brother Adams to take our warm Christian love and greetings back to our brothers at Bethel. Would you like to do that? I'm sure he'll be happy to do that for us. Now let's all stand and enjoy singing together song number 181, Join in the Kingdom Song, 181. And following the song, Brother Adams is going to represent us in prayer.